Hey everybody, it's Joel. I'm down at Boom Comics talking about the four eras of the Dryden sci-fi universe. This is the introduction to the Belle Epoque, which it translates literally as Age of Beauty and runs from the year 2600 to about 40,000 AD. This era is, right now I'm sitting in the middle of June of 2015. It's just growing really fast, and it's very exciting. One of the reasons why I reshot the four eras videos, or I'm reshooting the four eras videos, is because Belle Epoque is growing so fast that our previous description is no longer very accurate. So keeping up with the story so far, we had 600 years or so of really pretty hard science fiction, pretty closely centered around the Earth in the primer. But as that was going on, we had humans sort of leaking off of the edges, leaving known human space, using framing technology, ships, and just sort of disappearing out into the galaxy. Well, all of that changed very suddenly one day when the Europan rose up around Jupiter and started a biological weapons warfare. He builds organic spaceships, war on humans, and at the same time, Il Solitaire, which are the cybernetic space whales, started taking control of human space away from the humans in order to control the ecological disaster. And so human space, the 300 light years or so around the Earth, entered what is a very sort of quiet period where they are still there, they're still evolving, they're still having adventures, but it's an era of literally flying space whales and giant organic spaceships rather than so much about humans. But what has happened outside of that sort of bubble is really not well defined. We know that there are a lot of humans out there. We know that they continue to have adventures, and intentionally the science is becoming much softer. We're not paying so much attention. We're looking for 40,000 years of empires and kingdoms and the rise and fall of great states, and that's started to happen. And sort of the logic here is that there are 10 billion stars in our galaxy. And if we divided that up evenly into 1 million star empires, we would discover that we had hang on a second, 10,000 separate 1 million star empires, which means that we have this absolutely astronomically large number of stories available to be told in the Belle Epoque. And then we've got 40,000 years to do it in. So even if your empire lasts 10,000 years, that's only a quarter of the available time. So what has happened is people who are interested in sort of space fantasy, Star Wars style adventures have started gravitating towards this era. For example, Greta van der Rohe, who today published her first novella. She went directly to EPUB in the Dryden Universe, ask for the Galactic Cluster M24. She's got an empire she wants a couple of thousand stars for, and she wanted a place to put it, so we set her 20,000 years out off over there in M24. I've read that story. It's a fabulous story. It's really exciting. It's a dynamic edition. We're going to be talking about it at our weekly update on Friday night. We host weekly Google updates, and Greta's going to get a chance to talk about what's going on in her empire, and it will be appearing on the Wordpress blog starting next week. So that's just an example of what goes on. We're also working with Eugene Kelly. He's got an empire that he wants to build actually at the edge of the dark, which is the next era, but it's the same sort of thing. His folks are going to rise up near Galactic Center and go hunting for Earth, which contact has been lost with 40,000 years out in the future. But this is a place, if you love to tell those big expansive stories, if you like the rise and fall of nations, bring it to the Belle Epoque. And the other thing to keep in mind in the Belle Epoque is that we're not so worried about the technologies. Greta uses some sort of dimensional portal technology to move her spaceships faster than the speed of light, and she asked us, well, does that going to conflict with the framing technology? And no, not after 2600. The technologies of the primer fall away, and we don't know them. Eugene's idea was that by 40,000, things like LinCorp and TerraCorp, who were the big guys, the big players around Earth in the first few hundred years, are sort of legends. He pointed out that the empires that rose up during the Middle Ages in Europe really sort of emulated Rome and aspired to be highly civilized like Rome, but were in fact technologically vastly superior and would have run over the Roman army By the time England was sailing all the way around the world in ships, the Roman Empire would have not stood a chance to them, and yet still they were sort of heroes and idols of the English Empire as it began to rise. So this is an era where you don't need to talk about the primer, you don't need to talk about the technologies in the primer, but you could. They're sort of legendary. You're free to evolve the technologies that you're interested in, especially if they're sort of soft. I mean, if you look at Star Wars, how does a blaster work? We don't know. It blasts things, right? And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking to get away from the science that's the hard science fiction and get more into the fantasy elements where ships just split back and forth around the universe using whatever technology you use. The one thing that I encourage folks to do is kind of stay away from Earth. We're continuing to evolve the story of Belle Epoque, and I guess I shouldn't say stay away, but keep in mind that Belle Epoque and the Europan are still active around Earth, and if you want to write near Earth, you need to write stories that sort of match with that if you want them to be canonical. If you're not concerned about ever having your story recognized as canonical, write whatever you'd like. But this is the place for big kingdoms, big nations, old republics that are crumbling, new republics that are rising, political intrigue amongst the Star Lords, that sort of thing. And it's a little bit soft. I've only talked for 6.5 minutes here, but you know what? I'm kind of done. I think that I'm going to go on and start talking about the dark, because 40,000 years out, the universe changes again. Look for us in the video about the dark. This is Boom Comics, by the way. Thanks for joining us.